Hello and welcome back, and everybody, Levi here, and today I got another deck tech here for you for a new one I just put together. This one is a little bit older. It's from Strixhaven, and we are in the tapping, untapping theme in Boros. So the commander I'm talking about today is going to be Augusta, Dean of Order, 2 and a white for a 1/3 human cleric. It says other tapped creatures you control get +1/+0, other untapped creatures you control get +0/+1, and whenever you attack, untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. So that last ability is a little twofold. Obviously, when we attack, we don't have to attack with our commander. We can attack with any creature, and that's going to be the plan. We probably don't want to attack with our commander because it's going to most likely die in combat because it's a 1/3. It's that third ability that we're really looking for here. So whenever you attack, you untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. So obviously, that last ability, you don't want to tap down the creatures that have their own tap abilities. We do have some creatures in the deck that just want to be tapped, so whenever it becomes tapped, you do the thing. Those are the things we're going to be wanting to tap down with our commander's last little line where it says tap any number of creatures you control. So that's the whole deck, is mainly focused around tapping and untapping and getting value off of our tapped creatures' abilities. So the first category I'll go through here is our damage category. This is how we're going to be winning the game for the most part, is going to be dealing damage with cards like Nettle Drone, 2 and a red for a 3/1 Eldrazi drone with Devoid. As tap, Nettle Drone deals 1 damage to each opponent, and then whenever you cast a colorless spell, you can untap Nettle Drone. This is one of the better ones in the deck, seeing as how we have lots of artifacts in the deck. We're around 20 artifacts or so in this list, so it's likely that you can get this off multiple times a turn and not just from your commander's untap ability. Also, I have Wildfire Awakener. You pay X, 1 red and a white for a 3/2 human wizard with Convoke. When Wildfire Awakener enters the battlefield, create X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with whenever this creature becomes tapped, it deals 1 damage to target player. So like I was saying earlier, those tokens are going to be the type of thing we're going to be wanting to tap down with our commander's ability so we don't have to attack. I mean, you can attack with them, but I think it's best to leave them up. Unless you have free attacks and they don't have blockers, then obviously you can do that. However, you're going to want to be tapping them down with your commander's ability more than anything. Pretty unique one here, Witch Hunter, 2 white for a 1/1 human cleric. Has tap, it deals 1 damage to target player, so that's not the best one. Most all the other ones have tap, deal 1 damage to each opponent, so this one's a little bit worse, but it also has a second ability. You can pay 1 white and tap it to return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So it just has that extra benefit of being able to bounce an opponent's creature if we really need to. I think that one's a solid include in the list. The next category I'm going to be talking about is just general tap abilities, things that either have their own tap ability or want to be tapped. So first up, I have Attentive Sunscribe, 1 and a white for a 2/2 artifact creature gnome. Whenever Attentive Sunscribe becomes tapped, you scry 1. So that's pretty much it. Every turn, you can either attack with this and get it tapped, or you can just tap it off your commander's ability, and then you get to scry it. Not bad value for a little 2-drop. Next up, I got Jaxis, the Troublemaker, 3 and a red for a 2/3 human warrior. Pay a red and tap and discard a card. Create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and when this creature dies, you draw a card, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, and you activate only as a sorcery. It also has Blitz, 1 and a red, which you probably won't be using, but I like this for multiple reasons. 1, tap this, discard a card, create a token of another creature yet you have that has a tap ability that you want to use, either your damage abilities or some of the other ones I'll be talking about in a minute here. And then when it dies at the end of the turn, you get to draw a card. So you're replacing the card that you discarded a little bit earlier to use that ability. Plus, since it is a tap ability itself, you can use this multiple times a turn with your commander or some of our other untap abilities that I will be going to a little bit later. Next up, Mikaeus the Lunarch, X and a white for a 0/0 human cleric. It says Mikaeus the Lunarch enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. You can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on Mikaeus, or you can tap it to remove a 1/1 counter from it and then put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. This is decent value, especially a little later in the game, if you want to be able to swing with some of your creatures, seeing as how they do get a little buff off your commander. So regular damage in addition to our tapping damage is a way we're going to be able to close out this game, and Mikaeus helps us out with that. So this one's a little strange. I've never seen it before, and when I was researching this deck, I came upon it, and I just thought it's so unique in what it's doing. It's really going to screw over certain types of decks. So this is a color-specific card, Order of the Sacred Torch, 1 white for a 2/2 paladin. It says tap, pay 1 life, counter target black spell. So if none of your opponents are playing black, this doesn't do anything for the most part. It's still a 2/2 creature, so at least you can swing with it. But I figure if you are playing against a black deck, which most of the time you are, I feel like in any single game, I'm going to be be playing at least one black deck, so this can help you out if you want to be countering some of your opponent's black spells. Next up, Order of Whiteclay, 1 white for a 1/4 Kithkin Cleric. It says 1 white and untap this to return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This works really well with our commander because we can tap it on its attack trigger, then when it is tapped, we can use the untap ability of our own Order of Whiteclay, meaning we can get around combat. We don't have to swing with this to do the untap thing. We can if we need to, but we don't have to. And being able to return CMC 3 or less from our graveyard to our battlefield is really handy, seeing as how a lot of our creatures that have tap abilities and that are really useful in the deck are CMC 3 or less. Got a perfect fit in this deck out of Future Sight. Oriss, Samite Guardian, 1/3 Human Cleric for 1 white. You can tap it to prevent all damage that would be dealt to target creature this turn, and I'm just going to ignore the Grandeur ability because it doesn't really work in Commander, but seeing as how you have to attack with one of your creatures in this deck to get your commander's triggered ability, if you don't have a clear attack into one of your opponents, Oriss will be able to prevent the damage that that creature would be taking, so you don't lose it in combat and you can keep doing this over and over. That way, you know, say each opponent has giant board and you can't really attack at anything, well, that would shut down your plan, but with Oriss out, you prevent all the damage that would be dealt to that creature and you can freely attack at will. Got a really fantastic tap ability with Orthion, Hero of Lavabrink, 3 and a red for a 3/3 human soldier, has 2 tap abilities. First one is pay 1 and a red tap, create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control, it gains haste and you sack it at the beginning of the next end step, but only as a sorcery, and then you can pay 6 red, so that's 9 mana to do that, but 5 times. So you create the 5 tokens and they all go away at the next end step. The majority of the time, I'm pretty sure we're just going to be using it for that first ability to get a copy of another creature, so whatever value creature that you have on the battlefield that you want to get an extra copy of for the turn, because it has haste, so you can use whatever tap ability you need. But on the off chance that we have a ton of mana later in the game and we can create those 5 tokens, get a copy of, say, our Nettle Drone, tap it, deals 5 damage to our opponents, go to swing with our commander, untaps them, it's another 5. It can help close out the game a little bit later if we need it to, or it could just get us some insane value with that 9 mana ability. Really cool, somewhat new colorless commander here, the Peregrine Dynamo, 3 mana for a 1/5 construct with haste, says pay 1 and tap, copy target activated or triggered ability you control from another legendary source that's not a commander. You may choose new targets for the copy. So there's not too many other legendary sources that we have that are tapping in the deck, but we do have like the Orthion or Mikaeus or Jaxis that are legendary that the Peregrine Dynamo will help out. So I think it's worth it to run in the deck, even though it doesn't hit that many of our other things. Then I have some token makers with cards like Thraben Doomsayer, 1 white for a 2/2 human cleric, tap, create a 1/1 white human creature token, and then has Fateful Hour. As long as you have 5 or less life, other creatures you control get +2/+2. This is nice, just gives us some little bodies if we need to have some blockers up a little bit later. Plus, having little creature tokens is always a good thing. Next category here is fellow untappers alongside our commander that are really key to making this deck work. Obviously, getting the 1 untap with our commander per turn is really good, but to have these other ones in the deck in addition to our commander just gets us insane amounts of value. So first up, Drumbellower, 2 and a white for a 2/1 spirit with flying. It says untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step. Just insane value. That is why I have a $5 card in this deck. I usually keep my cards under $2 or $3 per card, but since this effect is just so good in this deck, I figured it'd be worth the $5 to throw it in this list. Next up here, Gideon, Marshal Paragon, 4 and a white for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. The +2 is untap all creatures you control, and those creatures get +1/+1 until end of turn, so that's the one we're going to be using most of the time. However, it does have some other abilities if you need to use them a little later. You can do the 0 ability. Until end of turn, Gideon, Marshal Paragon becomes a 5/5 human soldier creature with indestructible that's still a planeswalker, prevent all damage that would be dealt to him this turn. Yeah, I don't really see us ever using this. I feel like the +2 is just so much better, but the -10 is creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn, tap all creatures your opponents control. So that is actually usable in this deck. Seeing as how we do get the little buff off of our commander, then we could also do the +2/+2 off of this, so that's +3/+2, and you tap all creatures your opponents control. So if you have enough creatures out with, say, your Thraben Doomsayer or a couple of our other token makers, you could end up ulting Gideon and swinging for victory. Fantastic untapper in the deck, Lulu, Loyal Hollyphant, 3 and a white for a 3/2 Elephant Angel, interesting creature types, but has flying, and at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on each tapped creature you control, then untap them. So this is kind of similar to our commander, but on our end step, if something has left the battlefield, we get a 1/1 counter on everything, then you untap them, then you can use all their abilities again. So I think it's worth it in this deck to throw a few lands like Myriad Landscape and other lands that sacrifice themselves. If you happen to have them out with Lulu, you can get that trigger, but that's not the only way we can trigger Lulu. You know, we do have have some of the token makers like I was talking about earlier that could end up leaving the battlefield if we go to swing out or something like that and an opponent blocks. So there's multiple ways I think we can trigger this, but if you can get those little side values like I was saying with the lands, I think it would just make this card run a little bit smoother, seeing as we don't have like a permanent leaving the battlefield theme in this, but I think it's worth it running just in case. Next up, I got Reveille Squad, 2 white for a 3/3 rebel. Whenever you are attacked, if Reveille Squad is untapped, you may untap all creatures you control. So this is good in more than one way. If we are attacked, your opponents know that you're going to be untapping all your creatures, and then that's going to be a lot of damage probably, or a lot of other good abilities that we're going to be able to use. So if nothing else, it's a deterrent for people attacking you, but if they end up attacking you, you do get a lot of value off of it. Last up in the untappers, Sting the Glinting Dagger, 2 mana for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has haste. At the beginning of each combat, including your opponents, you untap equipped creature, and equipped creature has first strike as long as it's blocking or being blocked by a goblin or orc, so that's not that usable, but it also has equipped too. I've been putting this in so many of my decks, just anything that has a tap ability in your deck that you're going to be consistently getting, usually your commander, but since there's so many tappers in this deck, I feel like it just has such a broad use in the deck that you can put it on anything and get some pretty good value for it. So you're just going to be equipping your best creature with this, whatever you want to be using over and over, and then every single combat you get to untap it and then use that ability again. Next up, I'm going over the draw category here, and I have a second $5 card. Yes, I know. If you don't want to include either of these, it's understandable because they are not super budget, but this is just such a perfect fit in this deck that I really wanted to throw it in. I got Halo Fountain, 2 and a white for an artifact. Pay a white, tap, untap a tap creature you control, create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. Pay 2 white, tap, untap 2 tap creatures you control, draw a card, and then pay 5 white, tap, untap 15 tap creatures you control, and then you win the game. I think it's very likely that we could get a win with Halo Fountain in this deck a little bit later in the game if we have those 15 tapped creatures, because you know we can tap all of our creatures down with our commander. So if we have, you know, say a bunch of tokens with some of our token makers and then a bunch of our tappers, you know, go to swing, you tap all the creatures you control, then you play the Halo Fountain and pay 5 mana. If your opponents have no artifact removal or a counter spell, you pretty much just win right there. But even not looking at the you win the game clause at all, being able to untap our tapped creatures is something we are planning on doing in this deck to tap them further, and then it also draws cards and makes more bodies. So it's just an all-around amazing card in a strategy like this. Another great draw option, Volatile Wanderglyph, 1 and a red for a 2/2 golem. Whenever Volatile Wanderglyph becomes tapped, you may discard a card. If you do draw a card, so we have, obviously it's in red, so most of our card draw is with discarding, which is fine. I don't think that's that big of a deal. Another one here, Yasmin Khan, 3 and a red for a 3/3 human detective. Tap this, exile the top card of your library until your next end step. You may play it. So this is impulse draw, but is on a tap ability, so we can get multiple cards per turn with this if we would like to. Next category, I just have a few cards to go over in the ramp section. First up, Magda, Brazen Outlaw, 1 and a red for a 2/1 dwarf berserker. Other dwarves you control get +1/+0, which I don't think we have any other dwarves. The most important part is whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, you create a treasure token, and you can sacrifice 5 treasures and search your library for an artifact or dragon card and put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. The main reason we're putting this in here is for the whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure, because every single turn we get to tap our Magda with our commander's ability without having to attack with it. You know, obviously we can if we have the opening, but if we don't, we can tap it down with our commander and get a treasure every single turn, which is great value. And then you're of course going to want to throw in some mana dorks in the deck. Most of them are going to have to be colorless because Boros doesn't really do that very well. So Palladium Myr, 3 mana for a 2/2 Myr, tap, add colorless. So just a nice way to be able to double up the mana we get from our mana dorks, because they do untap with our commander. So since I have the lands that sacrifice themselves like I was talking about earlier, I thought I'd throw in Scaretiller, 4 mana for an artifact creature, Scarecrow, 1/4. Whenever Scaretiller becomes tapped, choose one. You may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield tapped. That's always good. If we happen to draw more lands than we can play one off of Scaretiller, and you don't have to attack because your commander taps down your creatures, or you can return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So if you have your Myriad Landscape or some other fetch land in your graveyard, you can reuse it over and over with your Scaretiller. Lastly here, I got Scholar of New Horizons, 1 and a white for a 1/1 human scout. Scholar of New Horizons enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. Then you can remove a counter from a permanent you control, search your library for a plains card, reveal it. If an opponent controls more lands than you, then you put it onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't, you put it in your hand. So on its face, you at least get the 1 land off of this. It could be ramp if you play this right, but we do have other ways in the deck like Mikaeus and some other cards that put 1/1 counters on things that we could use the ability more than once for. So I think it's worth throwing in the the deck just for that. And last but not least, I got a few cards here to talk about in the utility category. Since this is a very creature-heavy deck and we are committing a lot to the board, obviously you're going to want to throw in some board protection, such as your temple is under attack, 2 and a white for an instant. Choose one, creature you control gain indestructible until end turn, or you and target opponent each draw 2 cards. So in a pinch, if you need to draw cards, I guess you could do that, but I think the thing you're going to be using it the most for is giving your team indestructible. The last card I'm talking about here, Devout Invocation, 6 and a white for a sorcery. Tap any number of untapped creatures you control, and you put a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield for each creature tapped this way. So this is like a small alt win con if we need to, plus it taps down creatures that want to be tapped in our deck. So it fits with the tap untap theme, and I figure why not throw it in the deck, because it could end up helping us a lot later in the game. So that is all I've got for my Augusta Dean of Order deck. I'm not even going to be worrying about Plarg, the front side, because I will never be casting it, because it's all focused around Augusta and untapping all your creatures. I think this theme seems like so much fun to play. There's so much value you can get off untapping all your creatures, especially when it's in the command zone and you get to do it all the time. But being able to play with cards like Drumbellower and things like that untap all your creatures, you just get so much value off of these tapping abilities. Plus, this is one of those decks that every single set you can look for a new red or white creature that has a tap ability and then see if it fits into this deck. So this is a very long form deck if you want to keep this for a long time, and it could just evolve over time to be really strong. I feel like this is definitely one of those commanders. I think I'm going to be putting this one together in paper myself. Probably not going to be doing the exact same list I got here, probably just some cards that I have lying around. But if you guys want to check out my full deck list, I have the Archideck link down in the description. If you guys are enjoying this kind of content and the deck techs that I make, feel free to subscribe down below. But that is all I've got for today, and thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you all, and I'll see you guys on the next one. All right, take care.